And before we get started, I would just like to check with Karen Taylor. Karen, I'm not sure if you have been keeping track of how many people are here or not. But it looks to me it is 6 o'clock, like we have enough attendees to begin. Are you in agreement, Karen?
Yes, Chair, we are quorate.
Thank you. So I'd like to begin, colleagues, with just an announcement. In this time of virtual meetings that I'm sure we're all getting used to little by little, just a few logistical announcements before we begin formally with our agenda this evening. So I'd like to welcome you all to this virtual meeting. As I'm sure you're all aware, but just for the sake of clarity, I'd like to remind you all that the proceedings are taking place live on the internet and will be recorded for future viewing. And that will assist the conduct of business if participants will please speak when invited to do so. So I'd also ask you for the logistics of this to work effectively, if you could please mute your microphones, and many of you will most likely want to turn off the video feed as well when you are not speaking. We'll have potentially members of the public who are welcome to view the proceedings, but should not make contributions to the meeting. When I do invite you to speak, if you would please remember to unmute your microphone. It's easy to forget that. I'll remind you if you do. And then if you would please switch your video feed on when it's your turn to speak. And we would ask that you speak clearly and slowly into your microphone so that we can make accurate minutes of the meeting. If you would like to speak, if you could raise your hand, hopefully you've been able to locate the raise your hand symbol, and I will do my best to keep track of that. The other thing that you can do if you feel that you're not getting my attention is to turn your video feed on and you can wave at me, and hopefully I'll be able to keep track of that effectively for you. So if you don't have that, please just turn your camera on, unmute your mic, and just request to get my attention to request to speak. We want to make sure that everyone has a chance to do so. So thank you so much in advance for your patience as we try to get this technology to work for us. And I do apologize if we have any glitches, which we will endeavor to sort out as soon as we possibly can. So now we'll turn to our agenda. And I'd like to begin with item 1, introductions to tonight's meeting. And I have 2 introductions that I'd like to make very briefly. The first is to welcome Allison Ward to, I believe, her first Dudley Schools Forum meeting. Allison is a representative from Netherton Park Children's Center, and I think I see Allison is here present, so you're very welcome, Allison, to this first meeting.
Thank you.
Great, good to have you. We would also have welcomed Gareth Burton, who is the head teacher at the Wordsley School, replacing Mike Lambert. But unfortunately, Gareth needed to pass on his apologies for tonight's meeting, so we will welcome him at the next Schools Forum meeting. I'd also like to draw to everyone's attention that we also have in attendance this evening the interim head of SEND, S-E-N-D, so that's Tony Dewadu, and I see Tony is here, so you're very welcome, Tony. This came up in a previous meeting that we're delighted to have you in attendance. But I just wanted everyone to know that Tony isn't actually presenting this evening and won't be actively participating, but no doubt I hope you will find it useful to hear our discussions, Tony.
Thank you very much, Chair.
Great. Those are our introductions for this evening. And we'll pass on to a few apologies. Item 2, I've already mentioned Gareth Burton, who is our secondary head from the Wordsley School, who has passed on his apologies. I believe we also have apologies from an Academy member, Mark Moody, from the Windsor Academy Trust. And we also have received apologies from our Union and Professional Associations member, Alice Middleton. In terms of members, Karen, I believe, have you received any more apologies, Karen, from members?
No further apologies, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you, Karen. We also have our interim head of educational outcomes, Jeremy Keeble, who would have been with us this evening, and no doubt participated in our meeting, but needed to extend his apologies. So those will be noted. And in addition to that, just to inform members that Jane Davidson, who has been a senior principal accountant and participated in many meetings recently, has now moved on. There's been a shift in roles, and she will no longer be attending Dudley Schools Forum. So we wish her well in her new role as that moves forward. Karen, you're going to let me know if I think I've covered everything to do with apologies. And we have not been informed of any substitutes, which is item 3, unless any came up in the last few minutes. I think we're good to go on to minutes. Okay, so for our minutes, the first thing that we need to do for item 4 is to look at our minutes from the 23rd of June, a previous forum meeting, and we want to first approve these as a correct record. So if I can just ask members to, I'll go through one page at a time. If there's anything you want to indicate as a correction, and if not, we will accept these as a correct record. So please indicate by raising your hand if you'd like to raise anything in terms of accuracy. First with page 1. Page 2. We will do matters arising afterwards. Just pausing a little bit to make sure I don't miss anyone raising their hand. Page 3. Page 4. Page 5. Page 6. Page 7. Page 8. Page 9. And page 10. We have not had any matters of accuracy brought to my attention. So unless anyone raises their hand now, I think we will take those as a correct record. So let us move on to matters arising from the minutes of the 23rd of June. Any matters arising? I don't believe there would be from page 1. Okay, let us move to, first we'll take Paul, please. Paul, would you like to speak? Unmute your mic, please. Paul, there we go. Paul, we can't hear you. If you would just unmute your mic, please, Paul.
Sorry, Chair, I've jumped the gun slightly. It was page 4. I was just a little bit too eager.
Oh, fine. Okay, if you just bear with me, Paul. Brian, do you have anything on page 1 or page 2, Brian Rowe?
Thank you, Chair. Page 2, actually.
Yes.
Can I raise it now? Is that all right?
Yes, please do, Paul. Just do Brian. Yes, please.
Item 6, and it's the first paragraph where the Chief Executive Department undertook to provide further details with regard to the breakdown of 10 non-SEND pupils in independent schools. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, Brian. Yes. Brian, this is an item that I'm going to refer to as part of the budget working group. Are you content to wait until item 6?
Yes, I didn't realize that was coming up. So if it's coming up in
Yeah.
that item, that's fine. Thank you.
Fine, and I hope that we'll be able to answer your query. If not, you'll raise your hand and let us know, and we'll come back to that in just a moment. Okay. Still on page 2, colleagues, if I can draw your attention to the second paragraph under item 6. This was to do with representatives from budget working group, and we'll have a little word about that as well under item 6 this evening. Item on any matters arising on page 3. I will now hand over to Paul to kick off with matters arising from page 4. Paul.
Thank you, Chair. Item 10 on page 4, paragraph 4. The Assistant Director information was being sought in relation to the Domestic Abuse and Referrals team. Has that information been forthcoming?
Thank you, Paul. I was going to raise that myself, and I wonder if Helen has any comments to make on this. Helen Ellis?
Yeah, I mean, we provided information. I said at the point of providing the information that I didn't feel it was detailed enough. So we said that we would ensure going forward that we'd make sure that the information presented to Schools Forum Budget Working Group would have the detail. So at this stage, Paul, I've got to say I didn't feel there was sufficient information, but as I said, going forward, we will make sure that there is a lot more detail.
Thank you, Helen.
Okay. Page 5. I would just like to note under item 11. This is there's a few references in these minutes that will come up, I believe, in matters arising on today's agenda under item 8. So I think that we will come back to that in item 8, unless anyone has anything else to raise on page 5. Okay, let us move on to page 6. The first paragraph on page 6, carrying on under item 11, will also come up, some more references there that will come up under our item 8 this evening. And we have at the final paragraph before the resolved matters, there's a reference to meetings between chief execs from the borough's MATs, and we're wondering if that meeting has been set up. I think I had queried this myself earlier today, and I believe Jeremy Keeble was going to look into that, and Jeremy isn't with us this evening, so I don't know whether we could come back to this unless Helen has an update. Helen, if you'd unmute, I don't know if you have an update.
Sorry. Yeah, sorry, it just takes a while to kind of unmute, doesn't it? I don't believe that that's happened, and that's something that I've spoken to Jeremy about today. So we'll update the forum at the next meeting.
Thank you. If we could get that noted, that we'll come back to that at the next meeting then.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Helen. Page 7, any matters arising on page 7? Page 8. Oh, I'm sorry, I will have Joe Higgins. Joe, would you like to come in, Joe?
Just make sure I'm unmuted.
We can hear you.
Yes, good evening, everyone. It was just at the bottom of page 7 where I had talked about, I guess in these challenging times, the need for greater efficiencies and making our resources go as far as possible. So I had kind of offered to do a session with head teachers around the curriculum-led financial planning tool. I believe that is going to be planned for the budget working group, but it's just to flag up really that I am, very much able to do that. If you think that's something that would be useful, I would suggest that it is. That refers to secondary management of resource and looking at things like staffing ratios and curriculum bonus indicators, for example. But it can be incredibly effective around making sure that we get the best out of our resource.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you very much for that offer. And just to repeat that, if we might take a look at that, I'll pass over to Helen in terms of agenda planning for that item. Helen?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Joe. We'll definitely take you up on that offer. So we'll schedule you into one of the budget working group meetings.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you as well.
Okay. And moving on to page 8, under the item 15, there was a mention of to do with the capital schemes. You'll note reference to that in paragraph 3. And we were looking for some work to be undertaken in the autumn term, reported back to the budget working group. There have been 2 meetings thus far of budget working group in September. And I don't think that has happened. I just want to make sure that isn't lost, and if that can be added to agendas and a date set at some appropriate time, if that could be noted, please. Okay. Right. Helen, I assume you would jump in if there's anything more to say on that. So let's move on to page 9. And any matters arising on page 9. Page 10. Okay, I believe that concludes item 5. And we can move on now to item 6, which is the Head Teachers Consultative Forum, often called the Budget Working Group. We have verbal feedback from this group, but before we get into that item in detail, I would just like to remind regular attendees of the forum that we have spoken in the past about trying to work hard at improving communication from Dudley Schools Forum and flowing outwards to relevant stakeholders. This has been an item that we've talked about in the last couple of meetings. And clearly, Budget Working Group is a very important group that take a look at the detail of a lot of matters that are discussed at forum. So I'm going to just hand over to Vice Chair Jill Belcher, who would like to just raise a point about communication. So I'm going to hand over to Jill.
Thank you, Chair. Really, I think this is something we've had a couple of discussions over previous meetings over, and I know particularly representatives from the MATs who aren't necessarily head teachers, and perhaps governor representatives don't always get details or some of the communication that comes out from the local authority. And I'm sure Helen will be looking at this with the Jeremy going forward, but I wondered whether, just as an interim, we could perhaps, is it possible that the minutes from the Budget Working Group, could that be circulated to all of the forum? And if there were any confidential items, like with governor's minutes, they could be put as an addendum which weren't then circulated. I just think it would give the broader people on the group a little bit more information.
Thank you, Jill. Helen, would you like to comment?
Yeah, I'm happy for that to happen. Jill, I'm happy to take that forward.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, so moving on into the detail of item 6, the Budget Working Group met twice in September, on the 8th of September and on the 29th of September. And what I'd like to do is to just quickly, it won't take long, but just quickly summarize the key agenda items that were discussed at Budget Working Group. And then we'll come on to feedback in a minute. And there was quite a bit of overlap in the detail between the two meetings. The very first meeting of the year, I won't repeat if there was overlap, but one item that came up on the 8th of September that wasn't repeated at the subsequent meeting on the 29th had to do, it was for information only, to do with risk protection arrangements. And then the other substantive items were also looked at in more detail on the meeting held on the 29th of September, and that included member nominations for Feedback to Schools Forum, and of course we'll be looking at that this evening at item 7. There's some more detail about that on tonight's agenda. There was also the item which Brian Rowe mentioned earlier when we were looking at the minutes about the 10 non-independent placements. And this clearly involves personal information, which is confidential. So we will. I just wanted to make that point before we get into feedback, because there's obviously limitations to what we can discuss in a public meeting of this sort. So I will bring Brian in once we have a chance to get some feedback in just a moment. But I do think it's important to acknowledge that we're limited in a public meeting about the detail that we can give on those 10 placements, which involve the personal data of individuals. There was also the DSG Financial Recovery Plan, which we'll be discussing this evening. And then there's a practice at Budget Working Group to take a look at the reports coming to Schools Forum as a preparation for this evening. And so the reports that we have this evening were also discussed by head teachers in a little bit more detail. Now, that wasn't by way of giving any feedback. I just wanted everyone to know the key items. And we have, in the last couple of meetings, decided that it would be appropriate for one of the head teachers in attendance to give some feedback. And I think that our plans, our well-laid plans, may have fallen slightly apart, because the one head teacher, I think Rebecca Cox, had agreed to give some feedback, but had to leave one of the meetings early. And then Jeremy Keeble was going to step in, but he's not here this evening. So I'm just going to open up, if any of the head teachers who were present, you would really need to have been present on the 29th to give the substantive feedback for those meetings. Is anyone willing to do that? And I'd like to give assurances to Forum that moving forward, we will make sure that we have to make sure we don't run into a problem where I'm asking people on the spot, which is not ever a good practice. We will make sure that we have feedback sorted out at the start of the meeting, and we'll be able to provide effective feedback at subsequent Forum meetings. But to dig us out of the hole tonight, is anyone willing to, on the spot, give any feedback? Okay, so Mr. Minot, please. I see your hand is up.
Thank you, Chair. I'm quite prepared. I've got some notes in front of me that we'd made from Budget Working Group on that, so I'm quite prepared to just to go through some of those things we talked and ask any other heads who are also part of that meeting just to fill in if there's anything I've missed. In terms of the first meeting, unfortunately, I wasn't there, so I missed out on that one, I'm afraid. But certainly on the last week's meeting, certainly Jeremy started with conversation about the Children's Services verbal update and looking at the education strategy, very much sharing where we were in terms of key principles and being transparent in information around things like exclusion and place planning. Jeremy also shared with us the kind of the education outcomes team, so the structures around communication where the teams are led from him at the front and then the teams that are leading beside of that. We obviously were also then looking at timelines around the education strategy and just questions about what dates we would be around things like bases for some of the audit purposes. But obviously, although some of those dates are probably quite imminent, obviously they're still COVID related, so some things may not be able to happen whilst we obviously can't go into schools to do some of that work. So essentially that was from Jeremy's education strategy overview. In terms of the independent placements, and again, I know there are some members who shared this information at the meeting to us. We were given information regarding some of the placements and how essentially the placements were given in terms of agreements with health, social care, as part of the sharing of the costs. And obviously, if there's no agreement, there wouldn't be any placement. Essentially, there was information shared with us. I don't have all that information written down there from it, but certainly I think 2 out of them had EHCPs attached with them as well. But essentially, I think there's certainly the money would come to a commissioning group, which included health and social care as well as education within those placement planning. Essentially, then the other part of the meeting on DSG financial recovery, there was quite a lot of information shared with us on where we were at with the journey around the funding matrix for our SEND students, where we're on it's an 18-month journey. Looking at some best fit descriptions where we've done certain different versions. We've done a version as a whole school they had, and then a version within looking at one stream mainstream school that had a number of EHCPs, and they were looking at a 4th version there as well, which they are very close to finishing, hoping that then the matrix funding would be ready to be rolled out with the annual reviews from April 2021. And that's kind of the notes that I've got from their chair.
Thank you, Matthew. That's really helpful. May I just ask Brian if your query has been sufficiently addressed? Brian Rowe.
Thank you, Chair. It's certainly been helped, and I think it is a difficult issue, isn't it, that we say that we want to be open and transparent. And it's difficult when you've got individual families and pupils to deal with. But I'm glad that the head teachers have been given the information. We were told that no further details would be given. And I do appreciate the need to be sensitive, discreet, no identification of the pupils or the families. But in 40+ years of working in education, I confess I have no idea why the education budget is paying these huge sums for non-special educational need and disability students to be educated in independent schools outside the borough. And I did send an email asking if a sensitive way could be found to give the rest of us these details so we are aware. I mean, we're the guardian of the education budget, and these are massive sums. And I, for one, have no idea why they are necessary and why Dudley can't provide it itself. So I think I still need to know why we need to spend this money, and if a discreet way can be found to educate me and the other members of Forum who are not on the head teachers group, I'd be very grateful. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. So what I gleaned from your comments is that you're not asking for the detail of the 10 placements, but the rationale in general is a principle here. Helen, I don't know if you feel that you would prefer to defer a response that can be formulated when you have time to think about how that would be appropriate, or if you'd like to speak now.
Yeah, that's absolutely really helpful, actually, because the question has changed slightly. So I'm not saying that it's changed from yourself, Brian, but in terms of the assurances, without giving personal details, what we tried to set out was how we made those decisions around independent placements. But that query is firmly around the funding element. So we will take it away, and we will try and formulate a response that supports everybody in the forum today. So I can take that away with accountancy to come up with the way that the funding formula works regarding that.
Thank you, Helen. Brian?
Yeah, that's really helpful. I'm grateful for that. I'd just like to point out, I think this has been going on since February.
It has.
2020. So I think we do need to sort it out.
To box it off. Absolutely, I agree.
Yeah, Brian, I think your comments were really helpful, because I think we have kind of progressed in our consideration of this matter, and now it's really about the details have been shared with head teachers, which is appropriate in a different forum, and now it's about the rationale and the kind of process we go through to make those decisions. Okay, so we will come back to that. Okay, so thank you, Matthew. Do any other members who were in attendance at Dudley Schools Forum would like to raise something? Joe, I don't know. Joe Higgins, were you trying to? Joe has her hand up. Joe, over to you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much for the overview that Mr. Minot gave. I think it would be really helpful to see, prior to the next school forum meeting, some of that detailed funding matrix. And it's something that Tony referred to in the training session that new members of the forum attended recently. And I think if we could look at that in the light of getting the 4 mats together with Jeremy and Tony, and actually looking at the real kind of operational implications of the strategy, I think that would be really helpful.
Helen?
Yeah, we will. What we do with budget working group is test it out with budget working group, so that there'll be a whole process that sits behind that, and a whole communication piece. So definitely.
Thank you, Helen.
Could I just
yes, Joe,
on that? I mean, I think as another member of the forum mentioned, it would be very helpful that the agendas and minutes from budget working group, obviously recognising that some matters would be confidential, are shared with the forum, so that we get that, clear overview of all of the elements around the funding challenges that we are obviously working on collectively and shaping a strategy on. So, I understand the role of the budget working group, but I think it's quite difficult for members here to be able to have a really valuable input if there's a lot of the elements that we simply don't know about.
Yeah, and again, I think what we'll need to look at is that if the representation at budget working group is accurate, because part of sitting on budget working group is how that is communicated through to heads as well. So we probably need that conversation at the next budget working group, just to ensure that we've got the right members and we're communicating back through the channels as well.
Thank you.
Right. So 2 things. I mean, Jill Belcher raised at the beginning of this meeting, and we've agreed that we'll have some minutes emanating from budget working group and a discussion about membership. So that should be very helpful. I'd like to hand over to Angela Hannaway. Mrs. Hannaway.
Hi. Oh, that's not good, is it? Is that better? Oh no.
Sorry, Angela, have you got any headphones or anything that you're able to connect? Something that might be an issue.
Or it might be, Angela, that you've got another device by you that's giving feedback from another machine by you.
Yeah, if you've got a phone and that's on, that might cause an interference.
Is that better? I think
May I I'd like to suggest we'll give Angela a minute to see if she can remove if there's any devices nearby, and if I can hand over to Matthew Minot, who also has his hand raised, and we'll come back to you, Angela, in just a moment. So I'll hand over to you.
Thank you, Chair. It's just around just the communication. We do only meet as a budget working group only 1 week before schools forum. So sometimes, obviously, the minutes of our meetings won't be in time for the next schools forum. We're dependent on the people obviously taking the minutes and putting those action points in place. It's just a point to say that.
Thank you. Point well made. Jill, can I ask you to mute your mic, Jill?
Oh, sorry, I thought I had.
Thank you. Let us move to Paul, and then we'll see if Angela can come back without echoing. So over to Paul.
Thank you, Chair. With reference to Mr. Minot's last comment, it's important then that there is somebody from Budget Working Group who's available to give us a verbal update, because otherwise we're going to be working at least 6 or 8 weeks behind, so the information isn't going to get through to us.
That's another good point, and I think that it would be worth us just taking a look at this whole issue of communication at Budget Working Group and how we can improve the feedback both through minutes and the feedback that we give verbally at Dudley Schools Forum. So thank you for that, Paul. Angela, would you like to have another go?
Right. Perhaps not.
I'm just sorry, Rem. I'm just wondering whether it's worth Angela putting a question in the chat. There's a chat
I was just
tool.
going to suggest the same thing.
It might be worth just putting your question.
Thank you, Angela. If you do that, I'll open up the chat, and when you're ready, when it's come through, everyone will be able to see it. So if you want to give that a try. Okay. Okay, just taking a look here to see if we have no other hands raised on that item. So thank you for the feedback, Mr. Minot, and for those comments, which were helpful. We will move on to item 7, which is the Dudley membership, the forum update for item 7. And for this, I'm going to hand over to Helen Ellis.
Yes, thanks, Chair. This is really just to ask the forum to note the changes and just to note that the election process has started.
Okay. Thank you, Helen. Yes, so paragraph 7 and 8, give a little bit more detail about that. Are there any questions? If there are no further questions, we can move on to item 8, which is the dedicated schools grant. We'll be taking a look here. I think we're going to have, I think this will be in 2 parts. First, a brief introduction by Helen, and then we'll pass over to Laura. So Helen, if I can ask you to start, please, for us.
Okay, yes, thank you. What I just wanted to do was just to remind the forum that that the paper that Laura is going to present this evening is a decision that the previous interim director made in regards to the decision to take reserves to support the high needs financial recovery plan. So for me, in terms of just introducing this item, it was just to remind the forum of that decision earlier on this year. So I am going to hand it over to Laura, and then we'll open it up for questions. Okay, so Laura, over to yourself.
Okay. Can everyone hear me okay? Yeah. Okay, I've got some nods. Yeah, so this paper is in response that was made. At the time, it was agreed that we would present a paper to forum in October. So if I can draw your attention to page 7. So on page 7 is table 1, and that is an analysis of the reserve balances brought forward from 2019-20. So in total, we brought forward £638,000 on the school specific contingency reserve. And you can see within the table what the original purpose was and the use for that reserve before the decision was taken by the previous interim. So that is all there for your information and also for transparency. So what I'd then like to do is take you to page 8, which on table 2, you can see the proposals based on the decisions that have already been made, and also we'd like to open a discussion with schools forum members around the remaining unallocated reserve. So just to talk you through then what the proposals are. So of the 638,000 that remains, the first 474,000 is what is based on the decision that was made by the previous director around utilising that funding to offset high needs pressures, and that's recorded in the current finance recovery plan that was presented at budget working group and at prior schools forum meetings, and is also included in the consultation that's been issued to schools recently for the disapplication. So that's the first bit. The second part, the 24,000, is ring fenced as well. Now, the reason why that's ring fenced is that was taken last year as part of the LMS scheme, whereby it was agreed that if a school exceeds an allowable percentage, then that would be taken and ring fenced to put back into the central DSG reserve. So that just affects one school there. Then you've got the £45,000, which was to support the wider inclusion strategy around alternative provision and the pathways. Helen, I don't know whether there's anything else you want to say on that, but that's what's been ring fenced and what's currently there within the reserve for the alternative provision.
Yeah, no, nothing else to say, Laura, at this stage.
Okay, that's fine. So what remains then from the 638,000 is £95,000, and we've just put some options there for discussion around potentially ring fencing that to support the Cosley Free School, or to support the School Improvement Alliance, because we did spend money in accordance with the Schools Forum decisions in previous years around that, or any other initiatives. So at that point, I'd like to hand over to Forum to open that discussion, if that's okay, Chair.
Thank you, Laura. So if I can invite questions or comments, please. I just want to check, Angela, you have your hand still raised. That could be perhaps from the previous comment you wanted to make, which is now available in the chat, by the way. If you don't just shake your head if you're not. Okay, fine. So I'll let you spend some time lowering your hand while I look for any other comments, please, on this item. Okay, if I can start with Mr. Keeley, please.
Hi, thanks, Chair. One of the conversations that took place in the secondary Dudley head teachers meeting this afternoon with Jeremy Keeble and Joe Moles was this idea of behaviour, exclusion, inclusion, and what schools are currently doing in terms of managing the number of permanent exclusion, what inclusion strategies existed. And there was those heads that attended, there was a lot of discussion about Matt setting up almost inclusion centres, call them in alternative provision if you wish to, on their own sites that are shared within their group of schools within that particular MAT. And it was clear from responses that the Dudley secondary head teachers wanted an overview or an audit of what exists, because the days of the Sycamore Centre, short stay provision and other units, there's been in my short period within Dudley, there's been a significant decrease in accessing alternative provision. So from my point of view, our particular matter set up an internal AP centre, and I believe colleague from DAT, they've set one up at St James's, and I think the ideas existing within other MATs, but the head teachers requested knowing exactly what's going on within Dudley. So from my perspective, as a principal at an academy within Dudley, the wider inclusion strategy and that money to support alternative provision would be most welcomed, because certainly we'd like some support with setting up our unit. If the challenge is to reduce the number of permanent exclusions within Dudley LA, and it is, because all Dudley head teachers want that, but we need the funding to help us achieve that goal, because obviously that's the direction of travel. And we're certainly trying to reduce the number of exclusions, permanent exclusions within our particular school, and so is everybody else. So monies to assist us to put provision in place, whether that's staffing, whether it's resources, buildings, would be really appreciated. And I remember Joe at a previous meeting, I think it was in the June meeting, mentioned that she was having conversations with Jeremy and the authority. Certainly we would welcome a conversation, and I suspect if you asked Invictus or Windsor or any of the other MATs, the idea about having alternative provisional inclusion centres within schools is one that is quite popular up and down the country, or it's becoming more popular. So that's just the input, Chair, that I wanted to give on this particular point, because it's obviously the third one in table 2, and I would welcome any financial support in relation to the alternative provision strategy. Thank you.
Thank you. Laura, do you have a comment to make, or are you just noting that at this point?
Yeah, I'm making a note of that, but as part of the alternative provision strategy that's currently underway, I know that there have been discussions around that, and I can see Helen's ready to come in. I've actually sat in a meeting where that's been discussed today, so it's quite timely, really.
Thank you. Helen, anything to add?
No, I think Laura's just said it, and I think Jeremy will have mentioned it this afternoon to heads, to say that we're very keen to share what we've already got, in the sense that the part of the alternative provision review was to review what we got and the effects and the impact, so we know from a borough perspective we need to do something different, because currently what we've got isn't really working in the way that it should. So thank you for your comments, and we'll take those back.
Thank you, Helen. Right, may I hand over to Rebecca Cox, please? Rebecca.
Hi. Even from a primary perspective, I too echo what you say there with regards to provision for some of our children. Although I do have a query that how I take is 45,000. Is that correct? What's ring fence?
That's right.
I do have a concern about how far that should go and what that would be used on, because as we know, it's quite a huge problem, and that may only fund a wage for somebody that it's just consumed quite quickly. So it would have to be very carefully managed in order to maximise that money for impact, is what I would say. That would be my first comment on that. And secondly, obviously, having led the School Improvement Alliance school improvement work in previous years, of course, I would be keen to continue that for schools. And also noting from Budget Working Group in the education strategy that Jeremy did present, he was talking about school improvement and to ensure that children, young people have high quality education meeting their individual needs. And of course, in order to do that, you do need quality CPD for staff in order to make that happen. And there's not a lot of that about, and certainly not a lot of that locally. So I think we did achieve quite a lot by providing the school improvement work via the School Improvement Alliance over previous years. So it would be good to continue that. I don't mean necessarily me doing that, but I think it would be good to ring fence the money to spend on that in the future.
Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you. I know that Jo Higgins has her hand raised. If we hand over to Jo.
Thank you. I was going to make the point actually that Manny made, and I'd just like to reinforce that in terms of, you know, the vital need for that inclusion strategy that Jeremy was presenting this afternoon, tied in with the SEND challenges that we face. And if we look at, you know, the 45k and even the 95k, actually it isn't that much money. And if you think about, you know, what really challenges us at all levels, senior leaders, middle leaders, practitioners, support staff, to really be able to draw together a strategic plan and deliver high quality provision around, you know, the AP provision. We have our own Aspire Centre now at St James. We're aiming to have another one at Pegasus. And I think to share the thinking around that, as Manny's already talked about his plans at Thorns, I think that could be a huge benefit to the borough. And, you know, the money we're talking about isn't that much really, you know, 140k doesn't go that far. But if we look at pooling that collectively and getting the formats together as well, as Manny suggested, and looking at the economies of scale and what actually we could potentially all look to contribute if we have that sound strategy, I think there'd be a lot of mileage in that. And I would urge Jeremy to call this meeting really as a matter of urgency. Thank you.
Thank you, Jo. So we're looking at the concept of a wider strategy, you know, clearly thought out, alternative provision, CPD, and the School Improvement Alliance. Comments made thus far. Let us, Helen, is your comment specifically about Jo's point? Would you like to come in?
Yes, please, because I really do welcome the comments Jo's made and what Manny's made as well in terms of that collaboration. That's the only way that we're able to take this forward in the borough. So I will ensure that meeting is called as a matter of urgency.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Rebecca, would you like to come in again? I see your hand raised.
Can I just ask, is that for primary as well?
Initially, Rebecca, it was really to get the CEO mats together from a secondary perspective, because we've got quite a few gaps in the secondary arena. But if you'd find it useful for primary, which I'm sure we would as well, then we would call the same thing as well for primary as well. So yes, we'll take that forward as well.
Yeah, because it is a huge issue at primary. What you are describing there with regards to your centres, I have one in literally every one of my primary schools. In fact, I do have one in each one of my primary schools. So therefore, it is not a secondary only issue.
I'm not saying it's a secondary only issue, but we have got some major issues with secondary age children at the moment. But yeah, I mean, as you said, we've got the issues in primary as well, so we do need to pick it up.
But if you don't tackle it at primary, you're ever going to keep going and it won't ever solve itself.
Absolutely. The prevention element is key.
Okay, thank you, Rebecca. We've got a little bit of a queue here, so I'm going to go to Paul first. I'm trying to do this in order. So Paul, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just make forum members aware that we've got 7 special schools in Dudley and they're all good or outstanding. So if our mainstream colleagues want help, we've got a wealth of knowledge with the practitioners within within special schools, and you don't need to reinvent the wheel. So special schools are there, will be there to help.
I'm interpreting that as an offer. I think that's that could be very, very welcome in terms of where moving forward.
Collaborative working together. We want to work with the LA and other schools.
Thank you. Right. If I can go to move over to Councillor Buttery, please.
Good evening, everyone. Sorry, I don't know if my camera working yet. Sorry, I'm just back from work. So thank you, Rebecca, for your comments. You're absolutely right, obviously, around children often have to show these symptoms or issues in primary school, and then it carries on through to secondary school, and the sooner we can get supporting for those children, the better. So whether, I don't know, I can speak to Helen and Jeremy afterwards, whether we weren't actually having a roundtable discussion with the primary and the secondary schools together, and look, because we all know there's a huge issue in the 6 to 7 transition, and we lose a lot of children around there, or they start to show issues around there. And also what Paul was saying, I was speaking to a colleague at Halesbury School. Obviously they're quite specialist in autism, and they were saying exactly the same as you, that they have got all these years of experience and they're more than happy to try. I don't know, but he's not on the conversation, but equally I had exactly the same conversation as Paul was just saying, with one of the senior leadership team at Halesbury around sharing their good practices and their work with their children. So I think this could be, something that's really positive to take forward. So thank you all for your comments. And like I say, Helen and I, after I think it will be after Ofsted, I'm afraid. It might be in a week or two's time. We've got to get through that. If we can get our heads together and organise a meeting with the heads, and I think it would be important that it's primary and secondary school, and perhaps with a representative, perhaps if Paul could come from the special schools and look at not making it too big so it doesn't happen, but small enough that we can actually get a strategy together and then share it with schools forum. Perhaps have a paper to come for the next meeting, if that's okay with everybody. Would that be realistic, Helen, do you think?
Yeah, it's all part of the plan in terms of sharing and working together and the collaboration. So definitely, Ruth.
Okay, thank you, Ruth. Thank you, Helen. Jill Belcher.
Yeah, just really to support what's being said. Obviously with a governor primary hat on, I hear these discussions in primary schools, around the table, head teacher reporting. So it's really great to see that we are perhaps on the cusp of having some collaborative work between primary, secondary and special, and using the expertise that we've got from our MATs to support that. That'll all help to make the small pot go that little bit further, and I think that's really to be welcomed.
Thank you, Jill. Joe, I note your hand is still up. Did you want to come back in?
Yes, please. Just very briefly, a lot has been said that I entirely agree with, and to reassure everybody that we're absolutely thinking about cross-phase around alternative provision and a range of provision in the borough, and 3 of our 4 MATs are, of course, cross-phase. So to reassure colleagues, yes, it was always intended that we would be looking at the entirety of the provision and absolutely bringing in colleagues from our special schools as well to really work on the strategy. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that's a nice comment to tie up where this conversation is evolving. I just want to, at the moment, I think I've covered people who had their hand up there. I'd like to just clarify, Laura, if I may, that actually this discussion is very relevant. It's a very important discussion, and I can see that you and Helen have been listening very intently to the comments that have been made, but that actually this will feed back into a decision that's ultimately rests with the local authority. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah, that's correct. So it will be a decision that Helen makes based on the conversations that we've heard tonight and the discussions. Yes.
Right. So thank you for all of that input. And obviously moving forward, there's also the meeting that Helen is going to organize in order to get this collaborative working off the ground. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I believe we can now move on to our next item, item 9. This is the growth fund methodology, and I will hand over to Stacey to present this item.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Thank you. Okay, then, so looking at the at page 10 of the agenda, and we have the Growth Fund methodology report for next year's budget, so for 21-22, and it's the recommendation to Schools Forum that you agree the eligibility criteria and the funding methodology to be applied to those funds that we get in that contingency for next year's budget. If I can just draw your attention to paragraphs 8, 9 and 10, which are over on page 11. The guidance that we've received from the DFE has been a little bit more thorough this year, and they've given us a sort of guidance in terms of the formulaic approach that they will apply, which is allowing Dudley to estimate that we think we will receive around £940,000 in growth funding for next year's budget. What we've been able to do is we've been able to look at our provisional pupil numbers, which will obviously change based on the census data that we get this month. And obviously that allocation of the 940k will be confirmed by the DFE when they make their funding announcement in December. But based on the provisional information that we have, we believe that we will have enough funding to be to pay for all of the additional growth that has been identified off the pupil projections that we have. So just turning over to the Appendix A, the methodology and criteria that was agreed for the current year's budget for 2021 is noted on the page there as Appendix A. And what we're proposing to Schools Forum is that we continue to maintain this methodology and criteria for next year's budget, and we apply that so that basically we look at the census data that we have and we fund based on the minimum per pupil funding for 7/12 from the September to the March to give those schools that do take on 10 or more additional children that they are given that funding to bridge that gap really. Just that were involved in the discussions for last year's conversation this time last year, and just to make the other members that are new forum members aware, we did have a debate at forum and at budget working group last year, and we did a bit of modelling, and we made the decision that this was the methodology that we'd used in the previous year, and then that we chose to continue with for 19-20, 2021. So that's why we're kind of proposing as a local authority that we continue with that, because we had that debate last time and felt that this was still the most effective way to distribute the funding. So it's really over to forum if there's any comments or any feedback that we need to take back, and we can work on another model if that's deemed appropriate, or if not, then if we could get a decision to say that this is okay to progress with for next year. Thank you.
Thank you, Stacey. So I think that there's two things on the table, either support to agree the current methodology to be carried forward or ideas about alternatives. Let us start with Manny. I'll hand over to you.
Hi, thanks, Chair. Just a quick question around Appendix A and the bit that says additional funding will be allocated only to those schools where the number of additional pupils admitted is greater than 10. And my apologies, budget working group colleagues, I haven't been able to attend recent meetings. And I know in previous conversations over the last couple of years, we've talked about this number of 10, and that we would come back to it. Forgive me if I've missed the meeting where we may have come back to it, because there was talk about should it be 7, should it be 8? So again, Rebecca, Matt, Angela, forgive me if I've missed the meeting when this was discussed, but can you just remind me if that was where we got to in terms of that number of 10.
Shall I chip in? Shall I chip in as well, Manny? Yeah, because I've got some information back from the discussions that we had last autumn, and I think we did some modelling to have a look at admission around either 10, 8, and 5. And I think that what happened was it ended up being well, it wasn't affordable on those lower levels, and it started to then dilute the pot of money, and we couldn't afford to distribute it in that way. So I think after debate, it was decided that perhaps the criteria that we had was maybe the most appropriate, and we will continue with that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Manny. Thank you, Stacey. Other comments or questions? Okay. I don't have any. This doesn't look to me as if this is a item that we vote on. So I'm wondering about whether you feel the sense of the meeting is to support the current methodology. Yeah, it feels to me that I haven't heard any dissent. So here's your opportunity. We'll just pause in case anyone would like to put forward an alternative view, and if not, we will take it as read that we will move forward with the current methodology. Let's hear from Joe. Joe Higgins. Oh, Joe, please unmute, Joe.
Thank you very much. I'm not really questioning the methodology of this. It's just a plea really around place planning to look at, particularly I'm more aware of place planning and numbers in secondaries than primaries at the moment, but we do have a number of secondary schools and academies where they aren't at plan at year 7 and where, good provision is actually being offered. So given that, money is so tight when we look at every aspect of funding, I would just ask that that is really factored into the planning around where actually schools can take more year 7 pupils. And obviously there do need to be questions asked about quality of provision, but I think there are schools now offering a very good provision and they do have places.
Thank you, Joe. Any further comments? Okay. With Joe's comments noted, I believe that it feels that the sense of the meeting is to move forward with the current methodology.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Then if we now hand over to Helen, who will give us an update on the Children's Directorate. Over to you, Helen.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Okay, Councillor Buttery's just alluded, and I know a communication went out to all heads to say that we did have a phone call from Ofsted last Tuesday. They're going to carry out what is classed as an assurance visit between the 13th to the 15th of October. The inspection really started last week, where various requests for data and documents were asked for. Various meetings have been set up this week with the inspectors, but they'll actually be on site in a virtual sense from Monday of next week. We have 5 inspectors, one of which is a HMI education inspector. They will be asking to speak to schools. And we're just waiting to understand which schools they want to speak to. So as soon as we know, we'll connect and communicate with those schools. So the assurance visit is very much the assurance visit is very much around inspecting social care services. So that's happening. So within children's services, as you can imagine, we're very, very busy at the moment. So just bear with us. The other piece of communication for me as well, in terms of just offering assurance, we're working really hard to secure a permanent leadership team within children's, so there's various activity going on, and I'm sure Councillor Buttery will be able to update you in terms of DCS and what the plans are going forward regarding the DCS position. But it's just to reassure the forum that there's lots of activity going on. We talked about the education strategy a lot tonight, and I'm really pleased, and I really welcome all the comments this evening, and I feel really excited that collaboration is really building up now. We've got a real momentum in the borough, so I really want to just thank the forum this evening, because as I said, I feel like it's feeling quite exciting for Dudley in terms of moving our strategy forward and our inclusion strategy forward as well. We've alluded to audits, and we will be carrying those out, but we won't be carrying those out in the climate that we're currently in virtually. The other thing I really want to say is to thank all of our schools for all their hard work. All of our schools are attending school, and in terms of attendance, it is positive for the borough. DFE have all of those figures, and there are comparisons across the region, and the borough doing really. Again, I just because I know really hard. We're dealing with a lot of challenges at the moment, but again, it's felt really positive in terms of the connectivity with schools in the LA at the moment. So again, as I said, I just wanted to acknowledge my thanks to everyone, and just to acknowledge how hard all of our schools are currently working under very extreme, difficult times, and that goes with early years provision and our post-16 provision as well. It's tough, but we're all working in collaboration at the moment. And I think that's it for me, Chair. I don't think there's anything else further, not unless Councillor Buttery wants to add anything onto what I've said.
Councillor Buttery, would you like to make any comments?
This mute button's a pain, isn't it?
I know. Councillor Buttery, if you can hear me, I don't know. I feel that you did want to make a comment. Yes, over to you.
Sorry, yes, just to say, again, the same as, sorry, it's my dog in the photo as well. Keeps me calm. Just to say, yeah, again, thanks to all the schools for working throughout this time. I think we've got some of the highest attendance figures in the West Midlands, which is hugely encouraging for the children and for the parents as well. Yes, it is going to be a challenging few weeks with us for Ofsted, but I think the work that's been done over the pandemic and prior to that, and hopefully listening to the conversations tonight, the work going forward, it's a good, not good story to say, but however you share things with Ofsted, but it's a positive narrative, if that's the right words to use. But yeah, just thank you to everyone, and yeah, and also for the support over the summer. Obviously, with the A levels, I know King Edward's was particularly affected by the A level incident, how we want to put that, but I think that the support that the schools for A levels and for GCSE results, the support the schools put in, and the fact we knew the destinations for all our year children, it's been some phenomenal work gone in there, and the support that the schools and colleges have given to our young people through this time has been quite phenomenal. So my thanks as a lead member and also as a mom. So yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you, Ruth, and thank you, Helen, for those comments. I just would like to open up if anyone has any questions on that useful update. Okay. And with no further questions, I believe that draws this meeting to a close. I'd like to thank everyone for your attendance and also for your input this evening. And date of the next meeting, I'm afraid that I did not note that down. Karen, do you have that off the top of your head?
Yes, Chair, it's the 17th of November.
17th of November.
Yes.
Okay, and I believe that will be virtual as well, so 17th
Yes,
of
Chair.
November. We'll see you then. Thank you very much. The meeting draws to a close at 19:10. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Chair.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.